In this video, we're going to be going over the motor unit. Well, when you look at the way skeletal muscle fibers are innervated, you typically have a motor neuron, and it comes from the spinal cord, where you have the cell body shown here inside the spinal cord. Here's another example here. And then that motor neuron is going to come out, and it's going to innervate a skeletal muscle via whatever nerve it's being carried by. As it comes down onto the skeletal muscle, it's going to innervate that muscle. And here we have the end of the neuron called the synaptic end bulb or axon terminal or terminal bouton. There are a lot of different terms for this, but it's going to synapse with the skeletal muscle. We'll talk about what's happening here in stimulating that skeletal muscle in the next video. When looking at muscle innervation, typically a skeletal muscle is served by one nerve that has several motor neurons. So here is the spinal cord. These are the cell bodies of each of these two neurons, and they're coming out via a nerve, and that nerve is going to this muscle. Well, this nerve can carry several different motor neurons. And then when you get to the muscle, they're going to branch out, and they're going to innervate those individual muscle cells, which you see here. Here's the axon of this neuron. Neuron has a cell body. It typically has dendrites, then an axon that comes out and innervates what it's going to be innervating. So a nerve is just a bundle of axons and or dendrites carrying signals to or from the spinal cord to the muscle or another structure. It could be, for example, a gland, or it could be another neuron. Well, motor unit is that motor neuron and all the muscle fibers that it innervates. This motor neuron here, innervating these muscle cells, for example, right here, constitute a motor unit. It's that motor neuron and each of the muscle cells that it innervates. You want to make sure you star this. A motor unit is a motor neuron and all the skeletal muscle fibers or muscle cells that it innervates or stimulates. You also want to make sure you star both of these because there's a difference in the size of the motor units. When you look at skeletal muscles that control small, precise movements, they're going to have many motor units with relatively few muscle cells. For example, muscles of the fingers and the eyes. Looking at this diagram here, this is showing a motor neuron, and it's innervating this 1, 2, 3 muscle cells. So that's your motor unit. Well, this is motor unit 2. This is motor unit number 1. When an action potential travels down this motor neuron, it's going to stimulate all 3 muscle cells to contract. In areas where you have very fine control, for example, in the fingers and movements of the eye, you're going to have a lot of motor units. But they'll be innervating relatively few muscle cells, which means that when they stimulate them to contract, in this case, only 3 muscle cells contract here. If this one stimulates to contract, it's going to get 2 muscle cells. That's going to give you real fine motor control. And looking at the innervation of very fine muscle movements, like the fingers and the eyes, you're going to see that a typical motor neuron may innervate 10 to 15 different muscle cells. So not a lot of muscle cells. But when you compare that to muscles that cause large, powerful movements, they have motor units with many muscle fibers per motor unit. So instead of innervating only 10 or 15 muscle cells, these motor neurons are going to innervate 100, 200, 300 muscle cells. So when that motor neuron sends an action potential down its axon, it's going to stimulate all 200 to 300 muscle cells to contract. That doesn't give you fine, precise movement, like in the fingers and the eyes, but it gives you large, powerful movements. So again, a motor unit is just simply the motor neuron and the muscle fibers that it innervates. Then each muscle, each axon, is going to go its own way and eventually branch into multiple small extensions called telodendria or telodendrions. It just means more than one branch. So looking here, here's your axon, and it's branching into the telodendria or telodendrions. Telodendria is a Greek term meaning at the end of a branch. So it's these extensions at the end of the branch on a tree or a bush. These are called the telodendria. Well, each telodendrion ends in a bulbous swelling known as an axon terminal or synaptic end bulb or terminal bouton. They all mean the same thing. So when you're looking here at the end of this axon, we have this right here, which is called the synaptic end bulb, axon terminal, terminal bouton. And it's expanded because in this area, we're going to see that there are vesicles that contain a neurotransmitter that's going to be released by this neuron to stimulate that cell, in this case, a skeletal muscle cell. And since it's the skeletal muscle cell, the neurotransmitter in here is going to be acetylcholine. Well, where the neuron makes contact with another cell is called a synapse. You want to make sure you star this. This is the site of interaction between a neuron and another cell. And it could be a skeletal muscle cell, could be a cardiac muscle cell, smooth muscle cell, could be a glandular cell, or another neuron. This is an example of a telodendria again. You can see the branches that are innervating this cell, and at the very end are your synaptic end bulbs, or terminal boutons, or axon terminals, and they're going to contain the neurotransmitter that's going to be released to stimulate this next cell. Let's test your knowledge. Go ahead and pause the video, select the term that makes the sentence correct. Here are the answers. Let's test your knowledge. Pause the video, select the term that makes a sentence correct. Here are the answers. This concludes the video, and if you have any questions, let me know.